Okay, so to continue from where we left off, we talked about the if conditional statement, and we said that there are statements whose condition needs to be true before a program can be executed. So here you can see that I created a variable called name, and I assigned that variable a value called James. Now I'm now checking if the value I assigned to that variable name, if it's equivalent or if it's the same as another value which is also James on the right hand side. Now if I were to be using the print function to print this out, I would either get true or false. But you would see that here I would get true because name is equivalent to James. So now you can see this conditional statement here, the condition rather of this conditional statement is the same thing as true. Because if I were to come here and say print this just as an example, you will discover that I will get true. I will get true as the result. So this is the same thing as me saying if true. So if the condition is true, then this program would run. If this condition is true, this condition, if it is true, this program would run. Does it make sense? That's why we have the program. So the condition is not what we're trying to execute. We're trying to execute this if this condition is true. I hope that makes sense. So since we are done with the introduction of if, let's continue. All right, so we would go back to the notes and we would try to want to ensure that I'm viewing exactly what I'm talking about here. Okay, so we said this is now let's continue. So let's look at the if else statement. So this is when we write the else statement with the if statement. The else statement doesn't have a condition, but it executes a program the moment an if statement is false. So the else is just a statement. It waits for the condition of the if to be false. The moment the if condition is false, then the else statement proceeds to execute a program. I hope that makes some sense. So what I will do is that same code we wrote, I'll just copy it down. I don't want us to waste our time. I'll copy it down and I'm still going to be using it throughout for the else and the other types of conditional statements. So now what I will do is that I will make this condition false. I'll use a small letter. Then I'll come here and I'll say else. So else, what do I want to do? I just print this runs instead. So now because the condition here is no longer true, it is false, but I'm checking if the value assigned to this variable name, if it is the same as this value on the right. Although they are the same names, but they are not the same value. Python is case sensitive. So for that very reason, this condition would return false. So this program would not get executed. Now we said the else statement is a statement that executes a program the moment the if condition is false. So we can say that the else statement is always true as long as the if conditional statement is false. Now when I run this, you will discover that it will print out this runs instead. I hope you get the point. All right. So when you are done with that, comment it out. Comment it out. All right. So the next thing I'm looking at here is the if elif else chain. So this is when we combine the if, elif, and else statements together. We combine them together. So we can have multiple elifs, but one if and else in an if elif else chain. The elif statement is a conditional statement like the if statement, except that it is written after the if statement and it depends on the if statement. So if that definition wasn't too clear, so what we are trying to say here is that the elif statement is written immediately after the if we have other conditions we are trying to check so that we can execute a program. So the elif statement is written after the if statement. Now the elif statement is in between the if and the else. The elif statement has its own condition as well, just like the if. The elif statement cannot stand on its own. It is dependent on the if statement. The elif statement only gets executed the moment the if statement is false. The else statement waits for the if and the elif conditional statement to be false before it can be executed. The else statement depends on the if conditional statement, not the elif conditional statement. Both the elif conditional statement and the else statement depend on the if conditional statement. Does it make sense? We can have multiple elif conditional statements in an if elif else conditional block, but we can have only one if and one else. So we can have multiple elif conditional statements in an if elif else conditional block, but we can have only one if and one else. So in other words, what we are trying to say in total is that the elif conditional statement and the else statement cannot exist without the prior existence of the if conditional statement. That's what we are trying to say. And also, what we're also trying to say is that Python looks for the very first true condition before it can execute a program. So let's take, for instance, I have a if conditional statement and I have like two elif conditional statements and I have an else statement. Now, if the if conditional statement is false and then the first elif conditional statement is true, and then the second elif conditional statement is also true, and then we have an else statement, what's going to happen is that when Python checks the first condition, which is the if conditional statement, and sees that it is false, Python will then switch down and execute the first elif conditional statement because it is true, and then Python will leave the second elif conditional statement even though it is true. So Python will not execute the second elif conditional statement because it is true. It will not do that. The reason is because it saw a condition that was true before it. So the first elif conditional statement was true. That's why Python executed that and did not execute the second elif conditional statement, although it was true. So Python doesn't care how many true conditions you have. It looks for the very first one that it found to be true. I hope that makes sense before we start writing code. Okay, so let's get down to it. So elif, so elif condition. All right, so I'll just paste that same code that I copied. The name, you can see that to ensure consistency, I've been using the very first condition we wrote, the if conditional statement. All right, so I'm going to make it false again. I'll call it formel. Of course, it's false. Now create an elif conditional statement. I'll make it true. I'll say name equivalent to. You can just do something else. I can create another variable here and call it num equal to 45. I can come here and say elif num less than 50. So it is true. The number is less than 50. Now, if this doesn't make sense to you, go back and check when we looked at um, logical operators and comparison operators. It will make sense. The long and short, what we are trying to do is just to check if this is true or false. That's all. If it is true, the program under the condition will get executed. If this condition is not true, the program will not get executed. Now you can see that here I assigned the value of 45 to num, and I'm checking if that value is less than 50. It is less than 50. So of course the program under this condition would get executed. So I'll come here and say print um, 2 plus 2 is, you can come here and multiply it here by yourself. So before that, you put an F string so that it can read the value stored in the variable. A 2 as 32. Sorry, 2 plus 2. So this will give us 4. You can come here and see your else. Um, I'll just print out the same thing. This returns instead. Although it's not going to work. So we already know why it's not going to work. So it's not going to work because we have a true elif here. This elif is true. So the value of the variable is less than, that is 45 is less than 50. So this would get executed. This did not get executed because I'm checking if the value I assigned to a name, if it's the same as Hummel, they are not the same. So this is false. The Python will skip and check the elif and see that the elif is true and it will get executed. So this else was waiting for the both of them to be false before it could execute this program. Hope that makes a lot of sense. So we get 2 plus 2 is 4. Okay. So when you're done, just comment it out. Comment it out. Okay. Now the next thing we're looking at here is using multiple elif blocks. So I already explained to you how it comes in handy, how using multiple elif blocks come in handy. Okay, so like I said, I'll just paste it down, same thing, and I will just add a variable, same num equal to 5. Then you can come here and add an elif. So to explain or to further buttress my point, I can come here and say num less than 50, the same thing. I want to come here, create two variables, num a equal to 13, and another variable num b equal to 15. Come here and say print and make a sentence with them. Say num a multiplied by num b is equivalent to num a asterisk num b. Okay, so we know that this will get executed if the condition is true. And I'll create another condition, num also less than 70, less than or equal to 70. You can see that this is also true. Now we are now applying all that we have learned so far. We are applying all that we have learned so far, and I can come here and create a list. Just create data. Let's not waste time writing boring code. I will not waste time writing boring code. I'll create a for loop. I'll say d in data print. All right. So now, although we have the else returns, what's the word? This returns instead. So this. So let me just make it a bit smaller so that we can see it properly. So you can see that here, this condition is false. So Python doesn't execute this. Now Python checks the next condition to see if it's true. The next condition is true, so Python returns this instead. Now the next condition is also true as well. Num, the value of this variable num is actually 45, and 45 is less than 70, although not equal to, but applying the knowledge of the OR logical operator tells us that if we have at least one true value, then it means that the entire value is true, or the entire result is true. So the value of num, which is 45, is less than 70. So this is also true. But because Python saw a condition that was true before this one, it's going to execute the first one that was true and leave the second one that was also true. So if you run this, it will give you the multiplication of 13 and 15. So we get okay, okay. Sorry, I didn't change the value. My mistake. So I'll change it to Hummel, and I think I would copy this so that our result can be consistent. So Hummels, so you see we get 13 times 15 is 195. You see that? So you see that Python executed only this. So Python doesn't execute as many conditions that are true. It doesn't execute the result of the conditions which are true. It just only looks for the very first one that is true, and it executes the result of that, or sorry, it executes the program of that condition. So even though it has multiple true conditions, it looks for the very first one that was true. I hope that makes sense. So you can have as many elifs as possible, but you can have only one if and one else in an if elif else conditional block. I hope I'm making sense. Okay, so that's it. So now, because of now, you can also omit. You can leave out the the else block. Since the else block doesn't do anything or it never gets executed, since it is redundant, it can be done away with. So omitting, I don't think I spelled that well. So omitting the else block. So you can see it's the same code I wrote, but I just left out the else. So you discover that we still get the same result. So the else block can be done away with. Comment it out. And the next thing we want to look at now is testing multiple conditions. So if you can remember, I said that um, each if conditional statement can start its own elif and else block. So each if conditional statement can start its own elif and else block. So now I created three variables, I assigned them values, string values, and I checked if the value of the first variable is equivalent to Allen, which is. So it's equivalent to Allen, so this program would run. And the second variable, I assigned it a value of JSON, and I'm checking if that value is equivalent to JSON. As we can see, it is. So now this is where the explanation comes into play. Now, because they are all if conditional statements, Python will execute all of them as long as their conditions are true. So Python will execute all of them. So it's not like the if elif else, whereby Python looks for the very first condition that is true and leaves out the rest. Although that concept of using if elif else and Python executing only the first true does not apply when we are using it in a loop, which I would explain later. So that concept doesn't apply when we are using it in a for loop or a while loop, whichever loop you are using. So it only applies when you are using them on their own, when they are standing alone, when they are not embedded inside another statement. They are just on their own. So in this case, we have multiple if conditional statements, and if all the conditions are true, then Python would execute all the programs embedded in these conditions. But if one of them is false, Python will leave out that. Python would omit out that program and not execute it because we have a false condition. What I'm trying to say is that they are not dependent on each other. They are all independently. They are all independent programs. They run independently. They are not dependent on themselves. They are not like the elif and else. They execute their programs independently. Okay. So you can come here and you can create a variable called I'll just say name1 Lucas, say num1 2 4 and say data stuff. You can come here and say if name1 is equivalent to Lucas you want to print hello there in one, I'll come here and create another if condition and say num1 less than 2027, sorry 26. You can come here and say print we are in the year num1. You can come here and say if data is, is not equivalent to Lucas. I'm sure you can see what I did here. This is still true. It is true because the value of data is Christoph and Christoph is not the same as Lucas. So I'm checking if the value on the left hand side is not the same as the value on the right hand side. And as you can see, it is true. So they thought this was false, right? All right, so you will discover that they would all get executed. Why? Because they are not dependent on each other. So you can see we have hello there, Lucas. We are in the year 2024. You thought this was false, right? So that's that's it. We have our conditions. So they are all independent of themselves. They are not dependent on each other. So I'll be doing a separate tutorial for this using if statements with list. It's a lot more tasking. I can't rush it. So if you know you enjoyed this video, I'll be doing 3 parts. I've created the first part. This is the second part. I'll be creating the third part. And after the end of the third part, only then would I give you assignments to do. Like I said, those assignments are optional. If you want to do them, feel free. If you don't want to do them, you can as well. Don't do them. It's not by force. But the only way you can be able to build yourself as a programmer is to practice. That's the only way. There's no shortcut to success. I want you to understand that and get that very clear. So I will not be lying to you. I'm doing this from a very pure place, telling you how you need to be able to get better as a programmer. So with that being said, this brings us to the end of this tutorial. Now, if you enjoyed this, my tutorial, if it was audible enough for you, and if you liked it, and if you got information or if you were informed, please do well to hit that like button. And if you feel like it's going to benefit your friends, your family members, or people you know, please do well to share it to them using whichever social media platform. It will be much appreciated. And please, if you are not a subscriber yet, if you're just passing by, please do well to subscribe to my channel as it would encourage me to make more content like this. All right, so till next time, have a very great day.